Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Julia. I was an admission officer at Haverford College, an outside reader for Emory University, and I currently work as a school-based counselor at a school in Massachusetts.
I'm Mark Stucker, and I'm the founder and producer. Our mission is to make college knowledge available to all. We care deeply about your kid. We believe college is a match to be made and not a prize to be won. We believe in being genuine and transparent. We are committed to covering a variety of topics, including the tough subjects. Thanks to your generosity, we're committed to providing a minimum of 10 hours of fresh, commercial-free content every month, with episodes every Monday and Thursday. We have a variety of co-hosts because we believe and value diverse perspectives. You're our listening family, and we get great joy every time we meet with you, as we do our best to give you tools so your students can soar and reach their limitless potential. Good morning, friends. I'm coming to you on the eve of New Year's. And by the time you hear this, it will be New Year's. Of course, I'm sure you have other plans for January 1st rather than listen to a podcast. But it just worked out that way this year, where our Thursday episodes happen to both land on Christmas Day and on New Year's. And friends, I'm going to keep this episode really short today. It's just 2 segments. And the first segment is going to be, what do you do if you're deferred? What do you do? Now, I have been sent so many questions on that topic in the last couple of weeks. And I kept sending people a segment we ran on this a few years ago. And I got great feedback on that segment. In fact, I had one member of our listening family who, they didn't have a kid who was deferred. They just out of the blue said, you know, that episode that you did with Julia on how to handle deferrals, waitlists, I still remember exactly where I was when I heard that. It really was so powerful. So I'm going to rerun that segment. It's something I rarely do. In fact, I can only think of one other time I did it. Rick Clark did a segment somewhat similar last year. How to properly respond if you're admitted, how to properly respond if you're denied, or if you're deferred, or if you're waitlisted. I thought that content was really relevant. The difference is I am going to add probably about 15 or 20 minutes of new content. And so that segment last time, a couple of years ago, ran over 2 weeks. This is going to run over 3. I'm going to add a lot of new content, but that's what you're going to hear to start out today. And then after that, you'll hear the final part of the interview with Kev Sanders, breaking down University of Utah in Salt Lake City. Listen and enjoy.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Hey, Julia.
Hi, Mark.
Julia has like this hat on, like it's freezing in Boston over there, like she's about to go skiing.
Yeah, well, we had a lovely storm yesterday, but it was 60 degrees out, so I really don't have an excuse to wear this hat, except that it's been a busy day.
I hear you. Well, Julia and I have a lot of stuff to talk about today. We're excited to dive in, and we're actually going to give you 2 different tips today. So the first one, you really could almost call this a question from a listener, but I'm going to turn it into a tip. So I got a message from a podcast listener, and it said, hey, Mark, my student is up for a presidential scholarship interview, and they're telling me that we can only take one parent to go with us. Do you have any insight regarding what is best here? We are both fully supportive of taking whichever parent will be the most helpful for her. So, Julie, any idea how you would handle that? It was like,
wow.
You want me to tell you what I said?
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
So, so I like went to the Bible with Solomon and the splitting of the baby story, So I said, this is like Solomon splitting the baby. I said, my only advice on this is this could be stressful for your student to have to pick. So my recommendation is that you and your spouse discuss amongst yourself which one you think would be best, and then present that to your student and not make her feel like the divorced kid who has to decide where she spends Christmas.
Yep.
So
Very true.
that's my first thing. It's a family I'm working with, so I'll say that. I'm not going to say what state they're in. So then I said, if I had to pick between the two of you, I would pick you because you've been the most in communication with me for more than 80% of the time, and moms drive the process a lot in this business. However, there might be other factors I'm not taking into consideration, like, have you already been there? And your spouse has not to see the campus, or is your spouse have more time or other factors and you're not as available? So I feel like you have the big picture more than I do. That's my answer. Anything you want to add to that, Julia?
Yeah, this reminds me of sort of, and maybe not for as high stakes sort of visits, but this happens a lot with my students, especially at a boarding school where they might go on a college trip. And I often find my students do sometimes have strong opinions about which parent they perceive is more supportive. I have one of my students right now, even though mom would probably be the person she would go to for advice, she doesn't feel like dad is judgmental, even though I would argue mom is not being judgmental, but it just feels more free for my student to be along for the rides when she visits college with her dad. And it's the same when they actually do driving together. So I wonder, if you're helping to, or if you did help your student on how to drive, if you were the parent that no matter what you did or said, it was an indictment, your judgment was an indictment on their character, then maybe you would choose the other parent that had a chiller experience with teaching your child how to drive.
I mean, it was a hard one because part of my first thought was, well, you know better than I do, but obviously, like, they're torn, right? And so this is not uncommon. This one parent can come on some of these presidential things. So this is not, if this was like only one school in the country did this, I wouldn't even put it out there for a tip. But it's something that, I'm not going to say I see 20 times a year, but I certainly see it, every year more than once. Would you say that you see a decent amount of this too, Julia?
Yeah, we run into it too at Milton in terms of depending on what year the student enters the school, we like to interview the parents separately with the kid. And so sometimes, especially with separated parents or divorced parents, we have to do different interviews for that. And I think sometimes it makes kids nervous, like, oh gosh, like, what are they saying? Or what are they doing? Or what about if they're all alone? So I think it does. Even for college fairs, I see a lot of, one parent or no parents, just to either help with flow or just the information they need. They just need one point of contact on your family.
Yeah. The only other thought that popped in my head, and this may not make sense, would be, if there was a sibling and the sibling was really close to the student you're talking about, it might make sense to just have a conversation. Like, do you have a sense which, who you think the student here would just be more comfortable with?
Yes.
And then I guess the other thing is, like, lay your egos aside if you're not the one that ends up getting selected out of this.
Absolutely.
So that would be the other thing that I would say. So
child comes first.
There you go. So that's one tip. Now we have a second one. Instead of going with a tip and admissions vernacular and a big number, we're going to have two admissions tips instead of a big number just for this episode. This is a podcast listener sent in this sent in this email, and it just came in hot off the press. And I don't go around and read emails that people send in, but this particular listener explicitly said, feel free to read it on the air. And I want to read this to you guys. And the reason why I want to read it is because a lot of times, and I think sometimes, Julia, we can be guilty of this, that we don't talk enough about C students, B students, students with D's on their transcript. And it can lead to the impression that there's not a lot of hope for them, either for admission and certainly not for merit scholarships. And for all of you who have a student with multiple C's, or maybe even lower, and you're wondering if there's hope, I want you to hear what this email says. Hi, Mark and YCBK team. Just want to send you a big thank you to the entire YCBK team because your podcast has been so helpful to our family. I'm sharing our experience here with you in case it might be helpful to other families who feel discouraged and fear there's no place for their child to attend college if they don't have perfect grades and test scores. You have my permission to read it on the air. My daughter's a high school senior attending a rigorous charter school in Arizona. She has a 3.22 unweighted GPA on a 4-point scale and a 1200 SAT. She applied to 7 schools, 4 of which were rolling admissions, applied early action to 3 colleges that changed lives, liberal arts and science schools. So far, she's been accepted to 5 despite having 3 C's on her transcript and is awaiting decisions on the remaining 2. So she literally might go 7 for 7. So far, test optional has worked out really well for her. All of your podcasts that have talked about test optional were so helpful. That's another reason I wanted to read it. There's always a person that, thinks, I don't really believe them. And we've talked about the nuance on there because sometimes maybe you need to be cynical, but many, many times you don't have to be. Of the 5 schools she's been accepted to so far, our daughter has said that she could see herself being happy to attend 2 of them. One of those is one of the LAC she applied to. And that school awarded her enough of a merit scholarship that definitely puts it into the affordable range for our family, and we are thrilled. And I have to quote this because she got a couple of favorite quotes in here. I've often quoted your podcast to my daughter. It's not where you go, it's what you do when you get there and what you do when you get out of there that matters. Or my personal favorite, hard work beats talent when talent refuses to work hard. My daughter's graduating class is small. Some of her peers are really brilliant, the sort of students who don't try hard and they get A's, where my daughter has to put in more hours. She's had a lot of bumps in the road, and that quote has kept her going. It's helped us guide her from all the attitude of, maybe I'm just not smart enough for this, to an attitude of, okay, that method didn't work. Let's try another way. So it goes on to say that I felt like YCBK, you've been our virtual cheering section. You've been with us all the way. Many thanks to you. Happy Christmas, all that. So anyway, the 2 points. Thank you for your kind words, Arizona listener. But the takeaways here are 2, that there really are test optional schools that if you don't submit scores, you can experience positive results. And don't lose hope if you've got, some blemishes on the transcript and you start to have seeds of doubt pop in your mind. Any thoughts, Julia?
Completely agree. I'm really glad that this person reached out with that email. In fact, I just had sometimes actually for my students who might have a couple C's on their transcript, sometimes their processes work out better than my perfect students. Actually, I would say more often than not, my students who might have a sub 3.5 GPA have more yeses on their college list outcomes than my 4.0 students. Because if you're very thoughtful about a place that would support you and value you and nurture you, then you're very sort of, you manage your own expectations and understand things, then it actually ends up usually working out better for those students. And I just had 2 students who got the top amount of merit-based scholarships at a early action college, and both of those students had multiple C's and one had a D on their transcript. So, and they got the top merit-based scholarship on top of a couple other merit-based scholarships from a pretty selective school.
So there you go. There you go. And for our admissions vernacular, LOCI, letter of continued interest. And that is actually what we are going to be talking about today. LOC. I've never heard it called the loci. Have you ever heard that, Julia? This
became, yes, you should ask Rod Skinner his thoughts on this, because this became the vernacular, like out of nowhere, that my students were using about. And like, so I come from, I don't know if listeners know this, but I used to be in research before this, in clinical research. And that was a term we would use. So I was like, where did this
They're
come
stalking
from?
me.
Yes, I don't know who started it, but it seems to be what people all around are using now.
Okay.
Instead of saying, defer letter or waitlist letter. Or
Yeah. And obviously, when you're working with students applying to highly competitive schools, you're going to get a lot of these. So this is something that Julie and I are in the midst of, that question over and over and over again. Same for other co-hosts who are doing college counseling. And so this is an article College Find wrote on how to write a letter of continued interest. And so I'm going to do something a little different. Normally I summarize the whole thing and then we talk about it. I want to kind of take this in sections and just kind of get some commentary and stir up some conversation section by section. Does that work for you, Julia?
Absolutely.
All right. So in the intro, it says, for students who are waitlisted or deferred from a top choice college, the application process can seem frustrating or even discouraging. You're probably feeling some combination of disappointment and impatience. And I just wanted to just stop there and kind of acknowledge that those feelings are real. Mm-hmm. And I think as college counselors, it's important that we feel that with them and empathize with them because, you know, it can be a big deal if you've worked really, really hard for something, you don't get it.
Right.
It goes on to say that you now have to wait even longer to find out if you've gotten into the school of your dreams. And worse still, the odds of being accepted off the wait list are even slimmer than regular acceptance rates. So what are your thoughts on that, Julia? Do you find the acceptance rate is even slimmer than the regular acceptance rate?
For defers?
Yeah.
Yes. Sadly, yes.
I've always felt it's been, well, it depends on the schools. I was going to say similar, but then again, with the most competitive, so like is similar 6 to 8%, right? I mean, they're all so low, right? The regular admission rate is already so low.
Right.
And I also sometimes think it can make a difference if it's ED versus EA.
I do. I definitely do. And so sometimes I'll even talk to my students about that. What I will say is shout out to those colleges who are really intentional with their communication about defers. And sometimes that's not giving numbers, but sometimes it really is saying like, we've made a very concerted effort to not do any sort of what we might call courtesy defers. So maybe that's a student who's really strong and nothing's wrong with them, but there's not a reason to admit them. And so it feels cruel for the college to just give them the deny. Or sometimes we might have a student with a hook that matters greatly to the college. And even though they never intend to admit the student, a defer is sort of their soft way of letting the student down. More colleges these days, as we get into these really low numbers, are really trying to be more intentional about that. And so I will say for the schools where I see an intentionality in their defers, then yes, I would often see kind of a higher admit rate than if you had just gone in for regular. And especially I see this at small liberal arts colleges. If you're an ED defer, when they're trying to shape a class and figure out who they're going to yield, there's a really good indication that they're going to yield you because you already committed to them. And so sometimes I tell students, especially in ED2, where I know that it might not really be that advantageous of a pool, but it's the student's second choice, that I'd rather they do ED2 there than regular decision, because just in case they get deferred to regular, sometimes they do come out because they did make that commitment with ED. So I definitely see it more with ED defers, and especially at colleges, maybe not like a Harvard or a Georgetown where they just defer everyone, but definitely at intentional colleges that defer.
No, I want to completely concur with that. In fact, I'm going to share something which I think I might have shared on the podcast before, but if not, maybe you missed that episode or you forgot. But when I visited Vanderbilt this summer, I was really intrigued by, this is a counselor visit. So sometimes they talk, it's a different kind of info session they do with counselors than they would with, with families. So they basically said our top priority is to get our yield rate to 65%. So I was very, very intrigued. Like, how are you going to do that? Because first thing you think of is take more kids ED. And they said, we want to do it without taking more kids ED. Okay, so I want to know how you're going to do it. Because they just had proceeded to share data with us to show like their single biggest overlaps were the biggest brands in the business. So like, how are you going to get more wins about them? And I was really drilling them, to be honest. And I know they didn't tell me all the secret sauce, but they did say one thing. You probably remember this. Remember, Julia, when Vanderbilt never used to defer at all? It was an up or down straight Remember that? It was either like kind of what Stanford, remember that? And then they've moved away from that the last few years, right? So now they will defer. They intentionally said that one reason they moved away is because they know they can go to those deferred kids, and those deferred kids in ED, they yield at a way higher rate. So I think that I find for the regular, I was surprised by that statement because I find the regular decision admit rate and the deferred rate are really similar. But maybe they are lower. I haven't seen statistical information. But either way, it's pretty low, either one. And so I appreciated some honesty here about that. Because a couple of things. I also want to shout out schools that give their past few years data.
Yes.
That is so helpful.
So helpful.
When we're working with a family. Like, I remember a couple years ago, UNC Chapel, it might have even been last year. UNC Chapel Hill, it was like so minuscule. And that is one thing that sometimes can help a family like put it in perspective what their chances are. And that doesn't mean that we don't say go through with the letter of continued interest. But at least if you have data that shows this is really, really a low, percentage chance, hopefully you adjust your expectations to that.
Right.
Now, I have to tell you something that's grinding my gears over here. Georgetown defers everybody.
Everyone.
I mean, they had a 10% admit rate. I just saw the release. So 10%. Okay, wow. 1 out of 10 got in. They defer everyone, and Harvard's almost as bad.
Yes.
It's terrible. Because as soon as someone gets deferred, the first thing, okay, what do I got to do? At least I didn't get denied. That's the mindset, right? So shout out to the schools like the Dukes and the Chapel Hills and those who put their data out there about the deferral rate. It really helps us as counselors, and it also helps families. And I'm sorry, but Julia, why does Georgetown defer everybody? I
don't
can't
know.
even explain that. Like, how can you even justify that?
Right. Exactly. Especially like with very inappropriate candidates in there. Like there's like, it does not serve anyone. That's more work on your end if you're the college. And then it's not helpful at all to the prospective student.
I think anybody that works at a school like that needs to jump over to this side of the desk for 1 year and try talking to a family that is not going to get in. And they're like, at least I was deferred. We have hope. Anyway, I haven't done a grind my gears in a while. And that really, I'm dealing with a Georgetown this year like that. I do think this is an appropriate candidate, but I wish I could at least level set with some odds.
Right.
And give them some guidelines. Because now they're trying to decide, do I ED2 elsewhere? Which, by the way, they may do. Because it's still, we just have no read, and it's Georgetown.
Yes. And on top of that, both Harvard and Georgetown practice restrictive early action policies. Georgetown with no ED options. And so, especially if you're going to have a prohibitive early round in terms of what other results someone might be able to get, I would really like some transparency so students can really make a thoughtful list and good decisions.
And if you're new to this podcast or college admissions and you're not completely following that, so there's different policies around early action, right? So you have like MIT that's completely unrestricted. Apply anywhere else to MIT, they're good. And that's how most public schools are. Unrestricted early action. And then you have about 7 schools that have some version of a restricted policy. You have Georgetown and Notre Dame that won't allow you to apply to any other schools with early decision, but you can apply to early action. And then you have Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Stanford, Caltech that literally won't even let you apply to private schools with early action. They'll let you do your state, and you can still ED2. And sometimes there's internationals, use schools. Like there's some, read the fine print. But the point is, it's even more important if you've now put restrictions on people and now you're still not handicapping their chances. That's what Julia's referring to. Another thing that grinds my gears. Julia, you told me before we went in you might be spicy today. I think I'm the spicy one.
Yeah, I don't know if I transferred my energy or, I like to stay mad about these policies sometimes.
All right, so let's go on to the next thing it says. So what is a letter of continued interest? I realize we got so caught up in the loci and LOCI conversation and we never even defined it. So we'd use the article for that. All right, so here's what it says. If you've been waitlisted or deferred, this generally indicates a few things about you as an applicant. First, the good news, the college thinks you're worth a shot. My first thought when I read that, by the way, was what you thought about courtesy deferrals. That's not always the case. Sometimes it is a courtesy referral, which is a soft no. But for the most part, that's true, right?
Yep.
Second, they believe you might be a strong candidate. Of course, once again, if you're deferring 80 to 90% or more, maybe not, but most cases. Of course, this doesn't come without a caveat. Generally, if you're on the wait list, the admissions committee is not entirely convinced that you're going to be a positive contribution to the incoming class. I wouldn't word it that way. I would just say there's not enough spots. I don't know. Do you agree with that, Julia? That feels pretty harsh.
Yes, I would say for both waitlist and for defer, the spirit of defer is that the admissions committee thinks that you're a strong enough candidate that they like to see you in the regular decision round, right? And that a wait list to me would absolutely be like, there's just not enough spots, but you're very much someone we are hoping to admit if we have room off the wait list.
And, I do say this to some families, like in fairness, even schools like MIT usually defers around 62, 63%, and then they admit like 5. If you add up, say 63 and 5, you get close to 70. That's what these schools normally tell you the percentage of kids that were academically qualified. So that's another way of saying, you know what, you did meet our academic qualification. And I do think in fairness, that is why some schools do it. I once had a huge debate in our office in boarding school admissions over the same thing, Julia. I'm more in the camp of like only deferring or waitlisting people that have like a legitimate shot, because I'd rather you move on. And the other officer was like, if you met the admission standard, you know what I mean? You have a right to know that. And we're trying to encourage kids. And so I don't agree with that, because I think ultimately it creates more pain. But I do think sometimes it comes from a positive space of wanting somebody to know that they did meet the admission standard. And Julie and I both know people do handle deferrals different than denials as far as how much they feel they were rejected.
Right.
In terms of how it feels. All right. So then the article goes on to say, while they realize your potential, they have more qualified or compelling candidates, which obviously is true. A letter of continued interest is exactly what it sounds like. It's letting the college know that you are still interested in attending, even if you have to wait longer to find out. It also updates the college on any achievements you've accomplished since your original application, and hopefully convinces them you will indeed be a positive contributor to the freshman class. Anything you want to say on that, Julia?
Yes, and I think we'll get more into it. But yes, to me, that is the sort of main gist of a LOCI.
Yes, and I would agree 100% on that. All right, next question. What do colleges want to know about students who have been waitlisted or deferred? So these colleges generally want to know 2 things about you. You are capable of succeeding at the school. And secondly, you will attend if you are offered a spot. I think that last part is really important. So then it says what to include. All right. I really like this part, Julia. Like, of course, talks about expressing gratitude. And I think it's important. So it says, your letter of continued answer question should express gratitude for being offered a place on the wait list or deferred, because this serves as evidence of a positive personality traits like perseverance, ability to rise above adversity. I would also throw in optimism. You want to convey to the college that you haven't been sitting around moping over the fact that you weren't immediately admitted. If anything, you're even more motivated. Tell the school about a recent accomplishment, like how you worked on your AP physics grade up to an A+ in the 3rd quarter, or how you placed first in the DECA competition. Another good thing to include is a reiteration of why you are still interested in the school. Maybe you visited the campus over the winter break and fell in love with the humanities library, the original manuscripts from acclaimed writers. If the school's been in the news recently for a scientific breakthrough that excites you, tell them how eager you are to work with that faculty member to further their research. Any thoughts on that?
I really like this opportunity, actually, because what we'll find is that if the college even asks you, why are you interested in attending, you have a word count and you're limited by the exact question of the prompt. So you now have an ability to kind of move outside of that word count and that prompt to really say some things that have really stuck out to you about the college. And, it's not been a ton of time, maybe since you applied in the early round, or especially if this is a waitlist letter, maybe it's been a month since they've read your application. But being able to provide some updates that sort of not only further round out what you care about or who you are, but it's basically like sort of like a sneaky way to get in another 2 supplemental essays there for you for your favorite college.
Yeah, I agree. I really like this. I really like that. That gratitude thing is important because you don't want to come off woe is me, and you definitely don't want to even imply that, that you disagreed with the decision. Like, you know how people do that? Like, I couldn't believe it when this whole, I just don't want to go there. In my opinion, it's too risky that it comes off. It's too risky that it comes off with entitlement and sour grapes and woe is me.
Yes. I even tell, this article says, it's okay to express your disappointment. I actually even tell my students, like, even if they say, well, I was disappointed to learn I was deferred, I tell them to keep that out, because it also doesn't make the admission officer feel very good when they're rereading this, when they're reading this letter and rereading your application. So I like to just say, especially students struggle with, like, how do I start this letter? Super easy. Thank you so much for taking the time to reconsider my application. I'd like to update you on what I've been doing for the last few months and also express my continued interest in your college. Super simple.
I put an asterisk besides that same thing in preparation for this. I'm like, I'm not comfortable with communicating your disappointment.
No.
And because I just think it's just too hard to pull that off without, it's just too hard. So we have the exact same reaction on that point.
Yeah.
But I think there's some really good things here that I like a lot. So you know how I feel about the gratitude, and we've talked about that already. I really like this third point they made here. Like, if you're reaffirming your interest in the school, do it with something very specific. And so I like the example they had here. Like, you visited the humanities library and you saw the original manuscripts, like something very specific like that. Like, it's a lot easier for specifics to pop than just general mumbo jumbo that everybody says. And it just doesn't, I'm using Julia's term, doesn't land well. Mm-hmm. So I really like that. All right, let's keep going. All right. What not to include? Okay, this kind of is what we talked about a little bit. We get it. You're probably frustrated, disappointed. Maybe you feel inadequate or powerless. Talk to friends and vent to them. Take it on the athletic field. The letter of continued interest is not the place for those feelings. Keep your focus on the positives. So we've kind of talked about that already. Also, avoid talking about other schools you've been accepted to. Harvard's not going to think more of you that you tout your acceptance to Yale. This is like a backhanded way of trying to say, I think you probably didn't make the right decision because your competition values me.
Right. Or they will be like, oh, awesome, you got into Yale, so I know you're great. You're fine. I am not obligated to make your life happen anymore.
You know what? That's a really good point. I was having a conversation with a student. I'm not going to mention, a former admission officer who left one of the most selective schools in the country, one of the most, biggest of the brand names. I'm not going to mention which one. And we were having a conversation about how it can be really hard in admissions when you work at one of these really, really low admit rate schools, because you're like giving bad news out all the time. Like, you like to be a positive person. You're giving out bad news. And I know that was one of the things that made me leave, Julie, toward the end. That was discouraging, seeing extraordinary kids, and especially ones that you didn't have enough financial aid for. So that was like, I don't know how much longer I can do this. I remember having a conversation with another person. He's like, there's only so much pain you can take. Mm-hmm. And over the years, I've talked to a lot of people that have left admissions for this. In fact, somebody we both know very, very well, Julia, left a single-digit admit school to go to another school, and that was part of the reason why they said they left. So that's something that I've always understood. But the point you brought up about, fine, you're in Yale, go there. I was talking to this person from this really competitive mid rate, and I said, how did you deal with that? And he said, you know what? I'm going to be honest, that never really bothered me. And here's what he said: because I always knew they were going to be fine somewhere. But
right, exactly.
But when you flat out tell them, then they're like, oh, you're good. Let me maybe make the difference in someone else's life somewhere else.
Yes, truly.
All right. So the next thing it does is it gives a general outline for the letter. And, of course, it starts out saying, be warm, cordial, respectful in your introduction. Don't start by berating the admissions committee. We already talked about that. This is where we about the point of you can mention your disappointment. We're like, no, don't do that, but to keep it positive. Okay. So update on your accomplishments. What did you think of this? I thought the update was a little bit too long when I read it. I don't know what you thought. It said, limit your update to 2 to 3 topics. Be sure to explain briefly. Maybe it depends on the length of the school, and what they're saying you can do. But I don't know. I think that part has to be pretty succinct. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, I'm with you, Mark. And interestingly, and I feel, I don't know if you've been seeing this. I've been seeing this more with my students in the last 3 cycles, is that even if the school didn't explicitly say, like, you don't need to do X, Y, and Z in these letters, I've been finding that the weight of these letters is maybe 2/3 update, 1/3 continued interest in the college, which I feel more comfortable with a half and half at most. I also find, especially if we're talking about defers from the early round, literally maybe 3 months have gone by, right? So the other thing is, like, what kind of meaningful updates are there that have sort of transpired? And I sort of disagree with the article about updates on grades, because the colleges will get your mid-year grades if you've been deferred from an early round. And then a lot of the time, if it's on a wait list, I think you can request to get your final grade sent to that college if you would like. So I say, if they don't really have a lot of time, the admission officers, like, maybe really stick to at most half of your letter being updates. And those maybe are 2 to 3 about sort of really meaningful things to you, or something that you would have probably included based on the timing. So, for a lot of my students, if they get deferred, they didn't get to tell the admissions office about the end of their fall sports season. And maybe they went on to a championship, or they were awarded the coaches award at the end of the season. So there might be some really nice, hefty updates, but a lot of the time, and especially for students who feel like they don't have anything to update, that's okay too. You might not have a lot that transpired in your 17 to 18-year-old life in a 3-month time span.
No, I agree with so many things you said there. One, I don't really like the grade thing at all too, because you'd also run the risk of being seen as a grade grubber, and you only have a certain amount of real estate, and you're choosing to take your time on that, and they're going to get it anyway, I would say for me, I like at least 50% of it to be more you affirming why you're drawn to the school. And especially sometimes, even if you can articulate ways in which that school uniquely has an opportunity to be transformative in your life.
Exactly.
That's the kind of thing I like to go with a lot of that, at least 50% on that. Friends, when we talk about reaffirming your love for the school, we are definitely not talking about mentioning their ranking or their prestige. That is like nails on a chalkboard to most admission officers. When I was at Westtown School back in 2004, I remember this like it was yesterday. I subbed for Susan in terms of being the adult presence at an evening presentation by Brown University to about a dozen of our students. And after this session was over and the students left, I started talking with the Brown rep. And he said to me, if any student mentions that they like Brown because we are in the Ivy League, and then he made a motion like he was crumpling up a piece of paper and throwing it in the trash. In other words, they're toast. Same applies to mentioning the prestige or ranking of the school in the LOCI. Friends, this concludes part 1 of our article discussion on how to write an effective LOCI. We hope you'll join us for part 2. But before I leave you today, please don't send off your LOCI. Friends, this concludes this part of my segment of Julia on how to handle deferrals and wait lists. Hope you join us next week for part 2 of 3. All right, friends, let's transition to the final part of Kev Sanders breaking down University of Utah in Salt Lake City, flagship school for the state of Utah.
And now it's time for our college spotlight of the week.
Friends, in part 3 of my interview with Kev Sanders, Kev addresses one other concern that a Pacific Northwest family has about the University of Utah. We transition and discuss the admission process and the scholarships that students are eligible for. Kev talks about some of the trends he has seen at the University of Utah. Kev explains whether a student is applying into a major, into the college, undeclared, etc. And we discuss the role of test scores and what role do they play in the admission process at Utah. We close by Kev going on the hot seat in the lightning round. Listen and enjoy. The other concern that Mom, and she asked me if I could ask you about this specifically, is there's been a change recently in the scheduling. You can explain it better than me, but my understanding is, a student gets a class at, they're trying to publish classes between 11 to 2, and then that doesn't always work. They fill up. And so then a professor gives a student like a 4 o'clock class, and now that off-campus student feels like they have to come to campus, maybe go home and come back. Tell me what's going on with the new scheduling, the new system.
Yeah, absolutely. So that announcement was made by the university earlier this semester. And what they were looking to do was give a wider range of class availability. Wanted class time on most college campuses is between 11 and 2, right? That allows a student to have a morning, go to class, and then take care of whatever responsibilities they may have after class, whether it be work, caring for family members, caring for siblings, anything like that. But what the university was finding that, all of these classes being between 11 and 2, there were being students before 11 and after 2 that were needing some of these courses, but all of the sections were being put between 11 and 2. And so students weren't able to get options that allowed them to adjust their schedule. And so now faculty members are being told that they have to schedule their classes, a percentage of them outside of this 11 to 2 time. That gives students a larger range of when they can have these classes, and it allows them to have more sections of certain classes as well. Because between 11 and 2, you might only have 2 sections of this one particular engineering course. But if it's a very popular engineering course that someone needs to graduate or to move on to the next course, it's a prerequisite, you're going to need more sections of that. And so this mandate from the university allows, and well, I won't say allows, it kind of more pushes our faculty members to be mindful of that and open up more sections outside of this prime time 11 to 2, and even outside of that 11 to 2 on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, rather than just Tuesdays and Thursdays, to give students more opportunity. I'll be honest, I do think maybe that there was some miscommunication or an issue with how this was communicated to families. And I think as we get into this, the first piece of this goes into play in the spring. I think students will see that this doesn't change how they're able to create their class schedule and optimize it for what they need for those other responsibilities or things they may have outside of their class schedule to attend to. So I think there may be just a little bit of confusion in there from the university to parents and families about what this means for your student actually building their class schedule.
Thanks for clearing that up. Friends, after our interview was over, I realized I never asked Kev about 1 or 2 other concerns that a client from the Northeast had after a recent visit. Now, this client had a wonderful visit and was really blown away by the beauty of the campus as well as the access to the city. But the concern is that they felt like there was a significant amount of partying and drinking was one concern. And a second concern is, and here's a quote, the focus seemed like it was on the here and now and not on any of the after. The fun, the outdoor lifestyle, the cool experiences like the football games, but none on the internship or career focus that we saw at the other schools we visit. Now, I just want to say this very clearly. This is just the concern of one parent who's pretty academically focused, and your experience may be totally different. But I just encourage you to do your own research on these topics and reach out and form your own conclusion. What I try to do in these college spotlights, and I tell this to people when they commit to do them, I said, this is not an infomercial. This is not a puff piece. I'm trying to do a deep probe and bring out the strengths, the uniquenesses, and maybe some areas of concern that some people may have. I just feel that that's very important. And so I'm just trying to bring up some of the concerns that have been expressed. But overall, most people that visit, it really does exceed expectations. I meant to ask you, and you're a good person to ask, because you talked about how you switched into tech for a while. But my understanding is that there's a real growing tech scene in Salt Lake City. Is that correct?
Oh yes, it's a huge scene. Down in Lehigh, there's a area called the Silicon Slopes, right? And
Hmm.
that's where a lot of this happening. The Adobe headquarters is down there. You've got a lot of other big name tech folks that have, decided to make that home or a part of their home, a branch there. What's really interesting is a lot of those folks come right on up to the university and they participate in a lot of our job fairs. So our career services does a really good job at helping students while they're here on campus, get internships, get those jobs that could help, hone those skills, but also brings all those people back for, the graduation times to make sure they have opportunities to get those jobs. So yeah, really huge connection to the tech sector in the state, but also here on campus. If you're not familiar, the founder of Adobe went to the University of Utah. So we've got a really good connection to the tech world and some of those things. I believe one of the founders of Pixar also went to the university. So we've got some really, really good connections that are actively coming and recruiting our students to be a part of their workforce.
Oh, great, great, great. That's awesome. Yeah, so I want to ask you a few admissions questions and then we'll close with our tradition, our lightning round, put you on the hot seat there. So let's talk about your admission process. My understanding is that it's mostly a transcript review, rigor grade, scores, if they're on file. Is that correct? Not a lot when it comes to things like recommendations and essays and extracurriculars in terms
No,
of
I
what factors into the admission process. Talk to me about like how you evaluate a file.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say a little bit more goes into it than just what's on that transcript, right?
Hmm.
I'll explain to you the factors that we use, right? We have primary factors and we have secondary factors. How I like to explain it, coming from the community and access space, are your primary factors are everybody's are going to come in black and white. They're coming from your transcript and the classes that you've taken, the rigor, how much rigor you've taken, and things like that, right? But when it comes to your secondary factors, that's where you get to add color to your application, right? You're telling us about all your extracurricular activities, the ones you're
Hmm.
doing in school and out of school as well. You're telling us about your family responsibilities because those also play into how you're performing in school. And we know it's inevitable for some families and some communities that some students are taking on the responsibility in some ways of providing for the household, taking care of their siblings. And so we want to know about that as well. But we also want to know about, any awards or distinctions that you've received, right? And so accumulation of all that information comes from your application. If you're applying for, the if you're applying for the University of Utah, you can do so on the Common App. Our only deadline is December 1. That's our deadline for early action and merit awards. If you apply by December 1, there's a chance that you might hear earlier than January 15th that what your decision is. But if you apply by December 1, you're guaranteed on January 15th to get a decision from the university. Something that's new for us is we also have a new scholarship structure for in-state students and out-of-state students who are not eligible for the WUI. You're guaranteed a merit award of some sort if you have a 3.5 cumulative unweighted GPA or higher, right? So that goes all the way up to a 4.0, which is $10,000 if I'm not mistaken. We've crunched the numbers for the folks eligible for WUI. You might be wondering, we've crunched the numbers for you. WUI is always going to save you more money than our merit awards. Just keeping that in mind and wanting to put that out there for folks. But when your student applies to the University of Utah, their application is read by at least two folks on our team. It's going to be first read by their admissions counselor, somebody that they have access to throughout this process. And even before this process starts to get an understanding of, how to complete the best application and submit that to the university. So
Wow.
once it's been read by those two folks, a decision is put out there, and based on, again, that GPA that you applied with, you're also going to be awarded a merit award for the work that you've done throughout high school.
And that's a
And so,
cumulative GPA, right? So
yep,
not core, like that looks at all classes. If you had a cooking class or you had a class outside of the core classes, that would be factored into the GPA.
yep, it's going to be all your classes. So that cumulative GPA and unweighted. So if
Hmm.
your school doesn't provide an unweighted GPA, we'll do that for you. We'll do the
Hmm.
calculations to find your unweighted GPA, but we are taking into account all of those courses.
Are you seeing any trends that you're seeing from students who are applying to Utah?
Seeing any trends?
I mean, obviously, one was the growth of out of state. We've talked about that. I also meant to ask you have regionals stationed around the country that like live in a market and work a market. Do you have any
Yeah,
regionals?
absolutely.
Hmm.
We have three regionals across the state of California.
Hmm.
We have two regionals in the state of Texas,
Hmm.
one in the state of Chicago, and one in the DMV area.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, so we've got them pretty spread, and they
Hmm.
do help us get that name out there and start beating some of those perceptions because they live in those areas. They're just able to
Hmm.
have some of those more in-depth and routine conversations.
Hmm. Good. That's good. Now,
Um,
oh, good. You want to say
no, you
something?
were asking about the trends,
Sure.
and I think outside of the increase in out of state students wanting
Hmm.
to come to our institution,
Hmm.
some of the trends that we're seeing is a lot of the sciences students are really starting to see the University of Utah as a school they can go to for some of those hard sciences, and be able to get opportunity. I think students are starting to see that Utah has the opportunity that you mentioned earlier, and that going to our institution allows them to be able to find opportunity in some specific areas that they may not be able to in some other places.
Now, when students apply, are they applying into the university? Are they applying directly into a college of the university? Are they applying to a major within a college? Like,
Mhm.
where are they actually applying? That can get very confusing for me as well as our listeners. Each school's so different.
Yeah, absolutely. When your student is applying to the University of Utah, they're picking an intended major, and that major does, of course, sit within a college. So they'll be picking that as they're applying. We do have an undeclared major, which on this campus, you get plenty of opportunity to help figure out what that major can be, right? We have some courses called Quest courses, which put you in a cohort style class that is going to help you explore some of your areas of interest. We also have some early exploration in major advising. And this is a group of folks that help students sit down and kind of talk about their interests. What are the things you're good at? What are the things you're knowledgeable of? And how do those potentially translate into a major? And, on the back end, a job down the road, right? So
Hmm.
we do have those two opportunities there, but a student is applying to a major within a college. The only colleges, of course, that require, I would say, like an audition or something like that, are our BFA programs,
Hmm.
dance, theater, things like that. You're
Hmm.
applying to those programs, but you have to be accepted based on your audition to those programs. If you don't make the audition and aren't accepted that way, you then would change your major to something else if the University of Utah is still of interest to you. But in terms of all of our other majors, there are no closed programs. So you're applying to that major, and if you're accepted to the school, you're accepted into that major as well.
And what role do test scores play in your evaluation? Is there talk about going back to mandatory test scores? You feel like you're pretty firmly committed to test optional? Talk to me a little bit about like those questions, the role of
Yeah,
testing.
I feel like the university is pretty steadfast in the idea of remaining test optional.
Hmm.
We're finding that those test scores aren't giving us, good data on the success of a student or being able to predict the success of a student. So for us, they're optional. Our middle 50% range, well, the top of that middle 50% range for the SAT, if I'm not mistaken, was a 12, 20, and then the SAT is a 32. So how I like to explain it to students is if you're anywhere within that range, higher or at, or even slightly below, that's going to be something to strengthen your application. If you have test scores that are lower than that, they're never going to be a reason for us to deny you as a student. They're just not going to be a strengthener of your application, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
So a lot of times students have to, when they're signing up for the SAT and ACT, they're given those 5 free slots to, automatically send those test scores for free. If you've sent those test scores and you're not happy with them on your application, you can tell us whether or not you want us to even look at them. If you say no, we won't consider them in your application's process for review. But if you say yes, we'll look at them, and they'll always be something that we find is a strengthener for students in their application.
I got a sense, Kev, from what you were saying that there is a place for the undeclared student who hasn't selected a major your process. Are they at a disadvantage, or is that a complete option for someone that wants to go into exploratory studies or undeclared? How do you what's your terminology, and how do you advise students when it comes to that?
Yeah, terminology we use is an undeclared student. And so for them, they're not going to be what a lot of people would say is wasting time trying to figure out what their major is. Those academic advisors that they are going to be working with in major exploration are going to be listening to the things that they're saying to understand where they might be fitting in. And so they're going to help them pick some of those base level core classes, prerequisites that are going to feed into something later on. So the classes that you're taking, whether it be that first semester or your first full year, aren't going to be wasted. You're going to be able to use those for credit towards graduation based on the major that you pick. So you're not at a disadvantage coming in. One thing I would say is if you are an undeclared student, take advantage of some of the opportunities we have for you to talk to some of our academic advisors before you even apply or before you even get here. We have a prospective student group that takes appointments for students to talk to them before they're even applied or, a student here. So if your student has interest in the University of Utah, they're undeclared, reach out to the Office of Admissions. We can connect you to those academic advisors. Your student can schedule a phone call, a Zoom meeting, or if you're local, you can even come down and sit with them to talk about what some of those interests might be and what path that might be leading your student to.
All right. Is there anything we haven't said about the University of Utah? Are you ready to transition to our lightning round?
Yeah, let's do it. I think we've covered a lot and some of my favorite parts about the institution. So let's do the lightning round.
Yeah, no, you were great. I think you gave a great comprehensive answer. And not only do our podcast listeners listen to this, but we have a lot of college counselors that send out these interviews to anybody who has a school, they're recommending Utah. Hey, listen to this. So I'll be doing that as well as a lot of the college counselors in our listener group, which is, and our recent survey, it's about 1 out of every 8 of our listeners is a college counselor. So, yeah, we'll be getting a lot of usage out of this. You gave us some great content. So first question, what's the most adventuresome thing you feel you've ever done?
Oh, the most adventuresome thing that I feel like I've ever done. I think it was last year. I went up to the ski resorts with some friends, not knowing how to ski, rented everything, and I was like, I'm gonna figure this out. I'm gonna take these hours today, and I'm gonna figure this out. I fell a bunch, but by the end of the day, I ended up learning how to get on a ski lift, get off a ski lift, start, stop, and ski down a very small sloped hill. That's one of the more adventurous things that I've done in the past few years. But Utah also afforded me the opportunity to go ice fishing. It's never something I thought I would do, but catching a 22-pound lake trout that made my day. It made my year. So those are probably the two most adventurous things winter sports related.
You brought back a flashback to me. Growing up, my aunt gave us ski lessons, but we really weren't around any ski areas. And so this is in the mid 90s. I was in a phase I wasn't in admissions. I was working for a Fortune 500 company, and we won this big sales contest. So they took all of us skiing, and I was skiing, and I guess I went flying down the hardest mountain. I'm going down low. I'm bowling down really fast, and these, whatever they call them, like rangers, are coming after me,
Mm-hmm.
They stop me and like, dude, you think you're Franz Klammer? You're going to kill somebody. You brought back a flashback.
Hey, that's a major bravery there. I'm scared.
Well, we do a family reunion every Thanksgiving, and we just committed to go to Steamboat, Colorado,
Nice.
for next year. And my brother says, "Oh, we got to ski at least 2 days. We're in like ski country." So I'll see how adventuresome I get. What do you wish your 18-year-old self knew?
What do I wish my 18-year-old self knew? I wish that he knew with confidence and with learned skill, you can do just about anything.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Yeah, it's a great lesson. So let's think about your college experience. I want you to tell me one thing you would do differently and one thing you're really glad that you did this thing that you did. What would you say to that? The thing you would do different if you're doing college all over again, and the smartest decision maybe you made in college.
Yeah, one thing I would do differently, and this would change the trajectory of like my entire like from college to now. I would have went to culinary school. I
There you
was a
go.
Skills USA kid all throughout high school. I did the competitions. I even got a pretty good scholarship from Johnson and Wells, but I
Yeah.
just didn't think that was what was for me in my future. So that would be something I did different. I'd love to see what that timeline, provided for me. But the one thing I can say I do really, really, well, I'm really glad I decided to do was becoming involved on campus, specifically in this organization called Leadership Challenge at Coastal Carolina. It gave me the opportunity to learn how to be in community with folks, as well as be a leader in a community. And I think that was just a formative opportunity that's really paved the path that I'm on today, right? I think it is a formative experience that helped me become the leader I am today. So I think that was one experience I'm extremely grateful for.
Oh, that's great. That's great. What's on the bucket list?
Oh, what's on the bucket list?
You don't have one. You got to start a
Yeah,
bucket list.
I do, and I think that's because I think some years ago I kind of challenged myself to live more in the moment and do
Uh-huh.
the things that are presented to you that I would find, opportunistic and fun, right? And so I think if I had to put something on the bucket list that I'd love to do or see would probably be traveling to Africa. I did some
Hmm.
ancestry, a while ago. 83% of my bloodline comes from West Africa,
Oh, wow.
specifically Nigeria and that area. And
Yeah.
so I would love to experience that from a cultural lens,
Yeah.
from a not touristing, not to see the animals, but to get into the culture, the experience, the practices, the food. So I think that's something that is for sure on my bucket list, and I want to make happen before time comes.
How do you relax? How do you chill? How do you unwind?
Oh, how do I relax? How do I chill? How do I unwind? I have two cats that I
There you
love
go.
dearly. So playing with them, one of them likes to go on a leash and walk outside. So going outside with him, watching to see what he gets into. But the other thing I love is sewing and designing. So I like to
Hmm.
sew my own clothes and sew costumes for other people. It doesn't always help me relax and get chill, but there are some times when I can use certain parts of that process to really help me zone out and get chill or relieve some stress.
So, yeah, last question. What's your advice to our listeners? So, our listeners are mostly parents.
Okay.
Second largest group is college counselors. Third largest group are high school students. Any advice to
Yeah.
any of those listeners?
Yeah, my advice to your listeners would be to remind your students of just how smart they are, just how confident they are, and just how strong-willed they are. I think, in the start of this, you asked me a little bit of my story, and I told you about the times I took the ACT. Out of those 5 times, I got the same score 4 times, and so that fifth time, I went from a 19 to a 24. And that alone reminded me of, how smart I was, how much confidence I should have in myself. And I don't think anybody ever told me that leaving high school, going to college, and making this major transition. So if that advice I give to you is constantly remind those students, who they are and how much work they've done working up into this pivotal point. It's not going to get easier, but everything and all the work that they've done is only going to make their time more worth it and worthwhile. So just remind them of how much work they've done in this hard time of transition and what's probably really stressful for them.
Kev, you've been a fantastic guest. I've enjoyed this immensely. I wish you nothing but the best in your future. If our listeners want to learn more about the University of Utah, can you give them a couple good sources to go to? Either maybe a social media that you think you put out a lot of good content on, as well as maybe the main Utah website.
Yeah, absolutely. Our main Utah website is utah.edu. Really easy for you there. You can find us on social media, typically on Facebook and Instagram at, I believe, admissions.utah. So you can find us there. And if you want some really funny content, go find our U of U ambassadors page. They post a lot about the events that they're at, and sometimes they go on and do takeovers. So they show you what a day in the life of a student looks like on our campus. So that could be some good insights for our parents to understand what our students are doing throughout the day. And then also when we have some of our on the road events, you can see what tour guides are coming to you. So I would say those are some really good places on the socials to keep connected with us. But if you're ever looking for the official place, it's again utah.edu.
Kev, thank you again. You've given me more than an hour of your precious time, and we really appreciate it. And hopefully we'll get a chance to meet someday.
Absolutely, Mark. It was great talking to you, and thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. Friends, on Monday's episode, I'm going to start a new series with you. Now, I'm so passionate about certain things that sometimes I believe it can give the misperception of what I actually believe on a topic. And so what I'm going to do over the next several weeks is I'm going to clarify what I actually believe on certain things related to college admissions that might become a little surprising because I'm so emphasizing something that sometimes I think it can give the wrong impression of what I actually believe. And so I'm going to try to be more nuanced, more holistic. I think it's going to be a good series. I think you're going to enjoy it. And then Kate Strickland is up. We just had a great conversation about file reading at larger schools. You know, so much of the time we're talking about liberal arts schools. Susan spent a lot of her time working in liberal arts colleges. Certainly Hillary's at liberal arts colleges. Andy's at a liberal arts college. Admissions can be very different for a state flagship school or for large public schools. Now, this isn't a comprehensive assessment of this topic. We'll actually come back and tackle it more down the future. But we just talk about some of the ways in which larger schools read files, make decisions that are a little different than how smaller liberal arts schools do it. And we kind of bounce around. We cover a couple of topics. It was one of these things that I was originally planning on just making it like a 10-minute segment. But sometimes I call an audible. That's when the quarterback changes the play at the line of scrimmage because he reads the defense and thinks that the play we were going to go with is probably not the best play. So I called an audible because sometimes I just get a sense that I really think our listeners are going to like this. So why would I cut it off? So what started out intended to be a 10-minute conversation turned into a 50-minute conversation. And we completely scrapped what we were going to record on and said, we'll come back to that. We're going to talk about grade inflation. There's some good articles out there. And Kate and I are going to talk about that. You'll hear that at a later date. So you'll hear this over the next few weeks. That's Monday's episode. And we hope you'll tune in and see us on Monday. And friends, you know, at the start of the year, I leave a lot of quotes, but I got to go back to my basics. It's January 1st. It's not where you go. It's not where you go. It's not where you go. It's what you do when you get there. It's what you do when you get out of there. That is what is going to determine your level of career success. See you on Monday, friends, and Happy New Year to everybody. Hopefully, you will not be like me and you'll still be writing 2025 on everything like in April and May. Yeah, I really have a problem with that. It takes me like 5 months to realize I'm in the new year. 2026, 2026, 2026. Let's make it our best year ever. See you on Monday, friends. And that's our show. Big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you will get every single episode as soon as they are released. If you want to support our podcast, you can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can say positive things about your college-bound kid on your social media feed. And you can help us stay commercial-free and pay our staff by donating on the yourcollegeboundkid.website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. And if you have a question or a recommendation, just go to speakpipe.com/YCBK, hit the orange button, and speak. We will do our best to get your question in your own voice on an upcoming episode. I am the producer of the podcast, and I live in Metro Atlanta. We have a fantastic team that has over 200 years of admissions and counseling experience. Shout out to our co-hosts, Dr. Lisa Ruff in North Carolina, Susan Tree in Pennsylvania, Vince Garcia in California, Julia Esquivel in Massachusetts, Linda Depker in Missouri, Andy Strickler, the Chief Enrollment Officer at Connecticut College, New London, Connecticut, Hillary Dickman, an admission officer at Colorado College in Colorado Springs, and our international admissions expert, Kevin Newton in Dallas, Texas. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Matvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs from Kimberly Bloss. Our reliable webmaster is Stylionis Dimitru. Website updates are done by Joyce Stucker. Our image editor is Vlad Honchar. If you want to have a coaching session with me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you want to reach someone else on our team, all of our bios with contact info can be found at yourcollegeboundkid.com under the About YCBK tab. If you want to get our free monthly YCBK newsletter, YCBK Plus, it is also under the About YCBK tab. If you want to see our recommended books and websites, they are on our website under the Resources tab. While you're on our website, check out our hundreds of interviews in their entirety. Check out our college spotlights, our blog, and our upcoming events. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting with you every single Monday and every single Thursday.